The Sodder family's Fayetteville, West Virginia home burned down on Christmas morning, December 25, 1945. The parents and 4 children escaped, but 5 disappeared. Do these youngsters survive the fire? Unknown. George and Jennie Sodder and 9 of their 10 children lived there that night. World War II saw their son Joseph in the army. At 1:30 a.m., a fire started. Before we continue telling you about the mystery of Sodder children, subscribe to our channel for more interesting videos like this. Jennie walked downstairs to answer the phone at 12:30 a.m. on Christmas Day. She heard a woman's voice calling for someone who didn't live there. Jennie said she had the wrong number and hung up. She saw the lights and drapes were still on downstairs. Jennie imagined her other children had returned to the attic after Marion fell asleep on the couch. She went to bed after shutting the lights and curtains. At 1:00 a.m., an object hit the roof and rolled off, waking Jennie again. She slept again. She smelled smoke again and woke her husband 30 minutes later. They found smoke in the hallway and flames on the children's bedroom stairs. George's office's fuse box and telephone line caught fire. The family escaped when the pair called up the stairs for everyone to leave urgently. The parents, 23-year-old John, 16-year-old George Jr., 17-year-old Marion, and 2-year-old Sylvia escaped. Their sons, 14-year-old Maurice and 9-year-old Louis, and daughters, 12-year-old Martha, 8-year-old Jennie, and 5-year-old Betty, who slept in 2 upstairs beds, were absent. George ran to the side of the building where a ladder typically stood to reach the upstairs windows, but it was gone. He hurried to one of his trucks, hoping to perch on top and help the youngsters out the window, but it wouldn't start. Despite running properly the day before, the second truck wouldn't start either. He broke an attic window barefoot, wounding his arm. He tried to collect rain barrel water one last time but found it frozen. They watched as the house burned down, perhaps with the other children inside. The basement, burned timbers, and rubble remained after hours. Daughter Marion ran to a neighbor's house to phone the Fayetteville Fire Department, but no one answered. Another neighbor called from a tavern but got no answer. The neighbor drove into town and found Fire Chief F.J. Morris. Though barely 2.5 miles away, the fire department didn't arrive until 8:00 a.m. Then, just ash remained. Jennie's brother was a firefighter watching the ashes. Due to wartime manpower shortages, firefighters called each other to coordinate. Next day, Chief F.J. Morris reported his inability to drive the fire vehicle slowed the response even more. After a brief police and fire investigation, Morris informed the Sodders that no bones were recovered by 10:00 a.m. Their search was deemed perfunctory. Their children attended the funeral on January 2, 1946, but George and Jennie were too distraught. After rebuilding their lives, George buried the basement with 5 feet of soil and made it a memorial garden for their children. Even though she believed the children they were memorializing might still be alive, Jennie diligently cultivated the garden for the rest of her life. However, they questioned all official fire findings. Due to many unsolved concerns and peculiar conditions before and during the fire, local authorities' decisions were unsatisfactory. A stranger inquired about hauling in 1945. He pointed to 2 fuse boxes and said, "This is going to spark a fire someday." George thought this was odd as the local electricity company had just checked the wiring and found it fine. Another red flag was a strange car the family had observed several times before Christmas, whose occupants appeared to be watching the younger Sodder children as they returned from school. George also challenged the fire department's electrical flame finding due to the new wiring and positive safety assessment. They also puzzled why, if an electrical problem caused it, the family's Christmas lights remained on during the fire's early stages when the power should have gone off. He and his wife suspected arson, and the Sicilian mafia may have kidnapped the children as punishment for George's outspoken criticism of Benito Mussolini and the fascist regime of his native Italy. Then they recovered the ladder that had been missing from the residence on the night of the fire 75 feet distant. Jennie also had difficulties believing Morris that the fire had fully incinerated the children's bodies. The ash still contained many household items and tin roof pieces. She compared the fire results to a newspaper article of a similar house fire that killed a family of 7 and found all their skeleton remains. The Sodders' truck's inability to start was evaluated. George suspected the same individual stole the block and tackle and cut the phone line tampered with them. The woman who accidentally called the Sodder house was unrelated. When found, the caller said she dialed the wrong number. They found evidence that the fire was deliberately set. A Fayetteville bus driver saw people throwing balls of fire at the residence late Christmas Eve. When the snow thawed a few months later, 2-year-old Sylvia spotted a small, hard, dark, green rubber ball-like thing in the undergrowth. George stated the roof thump before the fire resembled a pineapple bomb, hand grenade, or other incendiary weapon, recalling his wife's testimony. The family later claimed that the fire started on the roof, notwithstanding the fire marshal's conclusion. 2 witnesses reported seeing the children. One woman watching the fire from the road saw some of them looking out of a passing car while the house burned. Another woman at a rest station between Fayetteville and Charleston said she served them breakfast the next day and saw a Florida licensed automobile in the parking lot. In 1947, the Sodders asked the FBI to investigate a kidnapping. J. Edgar Hoover replied to his letters, "Although I would want to be of aid, the problem mentioned appears to be of local nature and does not come under the investigative jurisdiction of this bureau." He stated that if local authorities asked bureau assistance, he would direct agents. Fayetteville police and fire refused. The Sodders recruited Gauley Bridge private investigator C.C. Tinsley for these many questions. Tinsley informed the Sodders that the insurance salesman who had threatened them with a fire a year earlier over George's anti-Mussolini views was on the coroner's jury that declared the fire an accident. He also heard reports in Fayetteville that Morris had recovered a heart among the ashes and buried it. Morris confessed to a local minister, who told George. When George and Tinsley told Morris this, he showed them where he had hidden the metal box, and they dug it up. A local funeral director uncovered cow liver that had never been burned in the box. Morris later admitted that the box was not from the fire, but he placed it there expecting the Sodders would find it and believe the missing children killed in the fire. Oscar Hunter, a Washington, D.C. pathologist, led a new house site hunt in August 1949. A child's dictionary and coins were uncovered after a thorough search. Small human vertebral fragments were also found. Marshall T. Newman, a Smithsonian Institution scientist, identified the bone fragments as lumbar vertebrae from one person. He estimated the victim was 16-22. Since Maurice, the oldest, was 14, these bones were unlikely to be from any of the 5 missing children. Newman said that the bone revealed no flame damage. Later, investigator Tinsley purportedly confirmed that the bone parts came from a nearby Mount Hope cemetery but could not explain why they were taken or how they got to the fire site. The 1950 West Virginia legislature held 2 hearings on the matter, which garnered national interest. Governor Oki L. Pattison and State Police Superintendent W.E. Burchett told the Sodders the investigation was hopeless and closed it. After 2 years of investigating dead ends, the FBI dismissed the case as a possible interstate kidnapping. The Sodders kept hoping. They distributed flyers with children's images and offered $5,000 for information. They doubled to $10,000. They installed billboards at the house and along U.S. Route 60 near Ansted in 1952. The billboard attracted kids. Charleston hotelier Ida Crutchfield wrote one. She said she saw the children a week after they disappeared. The youngsters arrived about midnight with 2 Italian men and ladies. When she tried to talk to the children, one of the males glared at her hostilely before turning around and spoke rapidly in Italian. Next morning, the group left. Investigators found her story unconvincing. George visited many leads. He went to St. Louis after a woman reported Martha was in a convent there, but he was disappointed. He also followed up with a Texas bar patron who claimed to have overheard 2 others making incriminating statements about a West Virginia Christmas Eve fire years before. After hearing one of Jennie's relatives in Florida looked like him, George demanded proof that the children were his. He investigated a Houston tip that 2 of his sons were in Texas. None were notable. The family persisted despite dead ends. Most sleuths and authors assumed the children died in 1945. The case remains an unsolved mystery because too many unanswered questions. If you want to watch more unsolved stories like this, please consider subscribing to our channel.